Oh hey, highguardianspice is now out. Huh, it's been a while since it was first announced way back in 2018. It was supposed to be a part of a lineup of new original shows made by the anime streaming site Crunchyroll, which are basically just a bunch of not-anime made by Westerners. Although it also received a major backlash due to using diversity as a marketing tool, similar to Disney, as well as contradicting themselves on that aspect by actively excluding men on the writing staff.
We are 50% female in all the creative roles, and our writer's room is 100% female.
Not helping was the fact that one of the show's writers, Kate Leah, was a full-blown misandress. So yeah, we're dealing with Tumblr/Twitter style hypocritical woke scolds here. Oh boy, this sure sounds like a lot of fun. But after that disastrous promo, there was barely any word on the show's progress, as if it disappeared off the face of the earth. That was until recently when the show unexpectedly resurfaced with an official release date and a trailer that was the definition of vanilla. Although with the original drama surrounding it having long died down, the general reaction to this news was, oh yeah, that existed. And of course, there are already people strawmanning and generalizing anyone who dislikes the show as bigots. But after having watched the entire first season, I can safely say that there are genuine problems with this show that ranges from its voice acting, animation, writing, etc., which makes it reasonable for someone to not enjoy it. Well, with such a controversial backstory, and with a lot of buzz surrounding it now that it has finally arrived, there's gonna be something interesting about it to talk about. So no more wasting time, let's review highguardianspice. So the premise to this series is that two best friends, Rosemary and Sage, go to High Guardian Academy to become guardians. Rosemary is especially determined to become a guardian, as her missing mother was one. There is one glaring issue, however. The show itself doesn't fully explain what a guardian actually is, only giving the audience a vague idea on who they are and what they actually do. Another thing that's established is that there's an old way of using magic and a new way. And just like with the Guardians, the show doesn't give too much detail on how each type of magic works, other than the fact that new magic is supposedly superior and more efficient. And then you have Sage, whose family always used old magic and has forbidden her from using new magic. And as a result, she has a lot of trouble adapting to the new way, especially since the school only allows the students to use new magic. Although, funny enough, there's a scene where another character tries to show her how to use new magic, by writing up the basics on a chalkboard. However, we don't actually get to see it. And in the season finale, one of the characters, Professor Caraway, combines both old and new magic. But it's difficult to comprehend how that's supposed to work, as the show only gives the most surface level understanding on how either type of magic works. Also, geez, a fantasy world where traditional magic is a dying art and the characters are forced to adapt to a new form of it. Now where have I heard that premise before? Okay, to be fair, having a show that has a similar premise to another one isn't automatically a bad thing. Take for example, Amphibia and the Owl House. Both of these shows have a very similar premise, as they both involve a teenage girl going to a different dimension, where they find a new family, and there's an evil tyrant who wants to take over the human world. However, both of these shows have their own style to them that helps them stand out from each other. The problem with highguardianspice, however, is that it's so mediocre that it can't stand out amongst the crowd of other similar shows that are far more worth watching. And then there is the setting, which is your most basic generic fantasy world. There is nothing special about this world to give it its own identity, making it feel flat and empty, especially when the show barely does any proper world building. Once again, I like to bring up Amphibia and the Owl House to explain how they make their fantasy settings uniquely theirs. Amphibia is a world that's populated by anthropomorphic amphibians, and the show takes advantage of that by having the world be shaped like a lily pad, along with swamps making up the majority of the landscapes. It also incorporates a classical medieval style, including a class system that shows the frogs as peasants, the toads as the soldiers, and the newts as the royalty and nobles. As for the Owl House, it takes a darker approach with its fantasy setting. As the show's creator, Dana Terrace, takes inspiration from artists such as Romedius Barrow, Hieronymus Bosch, and John Bauer, to create a world that's filled with horrific creatures and landscapes that are creepy, yet it also has its own unique sense of beauty to them. The point is, there's nothing unique about the world of highguardianspice to help it stand out. The story for the show's first season is pretty weak, as several plot lines feel disconnected and nothing flows together naturally from episode to episode. Plus, the pacing is really slow. I guess the most important plot point is that some toxic purple slime is killing nature, and it has something to do with this shadowy organization called the Trombolites. And while the show is clearly building things up for future seasons, this whole plot point feels poorly developed. The characters of this series are uninteresting, as the core group of the main characters have a pretty standard set of personalities for this type of show. Rosemary is the quirky yet determined hero, while Sage is the more cautious and book-smart best friend. Parsley is an optimistic blacksmith, and finally Time is the mysterious and broody loner, but also has a heart. Unfortunately, the show does nothing to elevate these basic archetypes, which results in none of these characters standing out. Many of the side characters such as the headmasters and professors of High Guardian Academy, as well as Sage's cousin Anise and her wife Alo, all sound interesting on paper, but all of the potential falls flat due to the show's bad writing and voice acting. There are two other side characters who are students at the academy, those two being Amaryllis and Snapdragon, who start up as antagonistic jerks to the main group, but slowly befriend them. Amaryllis for the most part is your typical one-dimensional bully from a wealthy family, and at the beginning, her character is very unsubtle, unlike other characters such as Amity Blight, who fall into this archetype.
Hey! Oops!
For example, she straight up says that she loves bullying. While she becomes a little more enjoyable to watch as the season goes on, her overall character development is pretty shaky. As for Snapdragon, he's one of the few characters I found myself invested in, due to his interpersonal conflict of trying to live up to the type of person his family wants him to be, and then goes through a decent character arc of learning to be comfortable and open with his true self. And lastly for the characters, there are the two villains. Olive, a cat girl, and Mandrake, who is a shapeshifter. They both work for the shadowy organization known as the Trumborite, which I assume are the endgame villains for this series. Olive feels really underdeveloped with her conflict of not wanting to kill anyone. I can't help but feel like we're missing a backstory for her, which leads to a sloppy character turn. And because of this, she doesn't pose too much of a threat to the heroes. Meanwhile, Mandrake barely makes an impression in the one episode he's in. As for the show's soundtrack, it's alright for the most part, even though it doesn't stand out much. Although the opening and closing credit songs were pretty mediocre, as the lyrics are completely generic and cheesy.
Friends for a lifetime, amazing adventures, and then now and forever, the magic, the laughter, so happy to be with you.
Plus, the English vocals failed to capture the personality and charm these songs were going for. Also, the voice acting in this show is horrendous. Like 4Kids dubbing levels of bad. None of the performances are engaging, and most of the time, the characters just sound bored, even in the energetic moments, which really comes across as awkward.
What? Oh. Huh?
And it's a shame because some of these characters have personalities that sound interesting on paper, but they're held back by the uninspired voice acting. I really do not care for this show's art style, as the character designs look really bland, and not helping is the fact that it does a poor job at imitating the style of anime. The animation itself is really sloppy, as a lot of the movements come across as unnatural and stiff. There were even moments where it looked like they skipped a few frames in the animation.
How's school?
Oh, it's fine. We're in break.
Seriously, I did not edit that. That's how the actual scene turned out. And there are times when the lip syncing doesn't match up.
It's nice to see you looking so happy. Thank you.
The facial expressions are also pretty weak, especially when the animation attempts to pull off the type of wacky expressions that are typically seen in anime. However, it's lacking the exaggeration and energy required to pull them off well, so it just ends up looking awkward. Also, the fight choreography in this show is awful, which can be an issue as there's a decent amount of action sequences in this show. Oh, and one more thing. They actually incorporate raw quality PNG images into some of the backgrounds, which is just... wow. Seriously? The writing is probably the worst aspect of this show, as it is the root of all its problems. It feels like that the script they're using was a first draft, as none of what the characters say feels natural. And most of the dialogue is an awkward exposition dump. Plus, it removes all the tension in the dramatic moments that are meant to be serious. This ties into various problems of the show, and because of this, I simply have no investment with what's going on, as all of these elements have been presented in the most awkward way possible, resulting in each episode feeling like a chore to get through. And last but definitely not least, there's the show's LGBT representation, which I actually thought was alright. Particularly with Professor Caraway, who is a transgender man. There are two significant scenes involving him, one where he explains what transgender means to Rosemary, and another where he gives advice to Snapdragon, who is struggling with his own gender identity. After Caraway explains transitioning to Snapdragon, he is initially interested in the idea, but admits it sounds difficult, and then Caraway tells him that he has the time to figure himself out before making a huge decision like that. It's great that Professor Caraway encourages Snapdragon to learn what he wants for himself, rather than telling him what he should be or do, as his interpersonal conflict stems from maintaining the image his family forces him to be. Yeah, these scenes do have an awkward execution due to the show's bad writing, but I do like what they were going for. You also have Anise and Alo, a married lesbian couple. Not much to say about them, they're just adorable and wholesome, and great parental figures. Also, having characters who have crushes on boys who are the same gender as them is all good in my book. Alright, it's time to wrap up this dumpster fire of a show with the conclusion. To summarize highguardianspice, its world building is weak, with probably the most generic fantasy setting I ever seen. The writing and voice acting make every scene feel unnatural, the characters are flat and boring, and the art style is an awful imitation of cutesy anime that looks bland, with poor and choppy animation. To put it bluntly, there is simply no charm or personality to this show. Although, honestly, if there was more effort put into the fundamentals, this could have at least been a decent show, but as it stands, it's rather generic. However, this isn't your average everyday generic. Oh no, this is advanced generic. And that just about wraps up my review of highguardianspice. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a like and comment. Also subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications. I would also like to give a shout out to my $10 Patreon, John Wallace. If you too would also like a shout out in my videos or just want to help support the channel, then head over to my Patreon. Well, I got nothing else to say, so see ya.